Hi, everyone. My name is Janet Forrest. I'm one of the adult program coordinators at the Nantucket Athenaeum. And welcome to Yummy Monday. It's nice to see so many new faces. We've been doing this for a while and we're building up a little bit of a following. And so tonight's speaker and presenter is Sean Reid. He has a lot of experience in the restaurant business, and I'm going to let him introduce himself and take over. So welcome, Sean.
Hi, folks. How are you? My name is Sean Reid. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I have about 16 years of restaurant experience. I currently work for the town of Nantucket in the sewer department. And I've been baking bread at my house for about 3 years. And I have a young family and have been on Nantucket for about 8 years. So bread is definitely a passion of mine. I'm mostly self-taught. I have read a few books on bread and have watched YouTube, and I'm constantly reading material on food in general. But for whatever reason, bread has become a passion of mine. So it's something that I like to do. I would say right now, on average, I cook bread 2 to 3 times a week. And it could be something that I just see and I like, and I say, hey, I want to try this out. Or I kind of specialize in sourdough at my house, and that's something that I have been doing for 2 or 3 years. So I often do sourdough. Let me just grab, I have a challah bread in the oven that just beeped at me. So I'm just gonna grab that out of the oven right now. So I have a kind of a short presentation with slides, and I want to go through that. And then I have a demo of how I make challah bread. And I just cooked a fresh one, so I'm happy to show you guys that a little bit later on. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and I'm going to kind of bring you through this small presentation that I made. Everyone can see that okay? So thank you for joining us this evening for Yummy Monday. I call this presentation Bread, and it's from my own experience. And it's an introduction to the idea of bread, including sourdough, enriched breads, rolls, buns, flatbreads, and more. My name is Sean Reid. These are my 2 Instagram pages, and I have my phone number on here as well. It's 518-742-9021, and I have my email address at the bottom. Anytime you guys have questions, you're welcome to call me. You're welcome to text me. I'm happy to help as much as I can. My phone is always on. Oops. All right. All right, today's demonstration. So we're going to talk about some equipment that's used in bread baking. The recipe that I use for a challah bread is actually a brioche bread recipe, which is like it's an enriched sweet dough, and it's a French style bread. So it's like heavy in butter. It's very good, and I love it in challah bread. In my experience, bread is your own interpretation of what that it's a style, but everyone has kind of their own breads within that style. That's where different recipes come from. So you can interpret a challah bread differently than somebody else. And I think that that's one of the greatest things about bread is it could be so many different things, but it's all inclusive. So it's everyone's included in it, and however they make it. Bread is made all over the world in all different corners of the world. So I just think it's great. I'm going to go through the basic shaping of a challah. I braid my challah it's very simple. Some people do it a lot more intricate. So we'll go through that. And then I'll talk to you about baking challah bread. If anyone's heard of James Beard, he was a very famous chef. He said, sorry, let me see. Whoop. He said, good bread is the most fundamentally satisfying of all foods, and good bread with fresh butter, the greatest of feasts. James Beard is a very famous chef. The top culinary awards in the country are called the James Beard Awards, if people have heard of that. So I'll talk to you a little bit about bread making equipment and equipment that I particularly like. And these are kind of the basic bread making equipment that I believe people who are semi-serious about making bread at home could use. You don't have to have certain items, but it just makes it a lot easier. Metal mixing bowls are very important in my opinion. That is a picture, they're called Rorance mixing bowls. They have a little rubber bottom. And I found that for me, those are the best mixing bowls that I can use. They're very stable and they don't like slide all around. A digital scale is important because in baking, things are weighed in grams and ounces and milliliters. Milliliters is a measurement of liquid weight. So anytime you see milliliters, ml, there will be talking about water or milk or something like that, juice. Dough scrapers are also very important. It makes life a lot easier to scrape bread. It makes bread a lot. It makes it a lot easier to scrape bread out of bowls, to cut bread in different shapes and different sizes. I like the Matford nylon dough scraper. It's very thin, so if you ever dice like fresh herbs at your house, it's great to scrape them off a cutting board or to pick them up and like put them in a dish because it's just so thin, so it like gets underneath everything. Dutch ovens are important to me, specifically in sourdough baking, because basically it acts as like its own steamer. A lot of professional chefs have ovens with built-in steam injectors. And at home, if we just have like a regular electric or gas stove, which most people I feel do, a Dutch oven is essential for that like rise and that pop in sourdough bread. And that helps, it basically like creates a steam chamber for half of the baking time. And then the lid is removed for the rest of the baking time to turn it that nice like rich golden brown color. I prefer a 5-quart Dutch oven. It's actually a 5.5 quart. That's the larger one that I have. But smaller ones are also okay. I personally wouldn't go too much larger than a 5-quart Dutch oven. And it can be any brand. If you're making bread, you don't need a like super expensive Le Creuset Dutch oven. I think Cuisinart or KitchenAid even makes like a really nice, affordable Dutch oven that they're just user-friendly and easy to use. Bread pans, 9x5s. They're like your regular traditional like sandwich loaf pans. I have one I think that I use to make regular like sandwich bread from that you would buy at the store. And I actually bought the one that I use at Stop and Shop. I think they're under $10. I do have a KitchenAid stand mixer. You don't have to have a stand mixer. If you are going to be doing some baking at home, it does make it a lot easier. And a bread lane is a fancy word for a knife that basically has, it's a razor blade on the tip of a tool, and it helps score the bread. And it's important to have a razor blade or something very thin to get like really nice score marks. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sourdough bread. This is a sourdough loaf. And again, that was baked in the Dutch oven, and it allows the bread to be steamed and have that pop, that opening that you see. It's just, that's like, to me, that's like a classic sourdough. So sourdough starter is what you need to make sourdough. It's also known as a pre-ferment, a leaven, a mother, or a sponge. It's basically a mixture of 50-50 flour and water. I know a lot of recipes say to use bread flour. You don't have to. I actually use King Arthur baking all-purpose flour at my house. I almost never use bread flour. I think bread flour will give you a little bit better chew, but I have had very good success with regular all-purpose flour. In my experience, it is in my experience that like a store-bought all-purpose flour, I have had issues with in the past. So I try to keep, I try to always buy like a name brand that you're familiar with, like Gold Medal even is fine, or King Arthur Baking, or at Stop and Shop, there's the organic bread flour. I'm not sure what company makes that. It could be Bob's Red Mill or something, but the store-bought Stop and Shop brand all-purpose flour, I have had issues with, so I just kind of stay away from that. I know during COVID, and especially during the first few months, it was really difficult to find flour at the local stores. And I know some of the local bakeries were selling flour. What I do is I buy 20 to 40 pounds of King Arthur all-purpose flour from Amazon, and I kind of just have it at my house. I think you can buy 50-pound bags if you want to. And I would suggest that. It's not gonna go bad. It is humid on Nantucket. I have a dehumidifier in my basement that runs all the time. If you keep it like in a bag or kind of airtight, it's gonna last for a really, really long time. A 50-50 blend of flour and water in baking terminologies is known to be called a 1-to-1 ratio, which means 1 part flour and 1 part water. That's what I do with my starter. This is a picture of my starter right here. You don't have to measure it out, but it is good to get a general idea of the consistency and what it should be like. For me, it took 2 to 4 weeks to establish a healthy community of yeast. Basically, the yeast is trapped from the natural yeast that's in the air is trapped in a starter. And what I do on a fairly regular basis is I pour out or discard 80 to 90% of the starter. Could be into the garbage can. You could use it in pancakes, or you can use discard in a lot of different things. A lot of people have heard that terminology, like, hey, I made muffins with sourdough discard. That's just because you had to feed your starter again to keep it going. If you're gonna leave your starter out on the counter, I would feed it once a day. I would try to be consistent on when you feed it. You could feed it once in the morning or once in the evening, whatever works out for you. But if you're gonna leave it out, I would feed it once a day. If you're gonna leave it in the refrigerator, once it's like going and healthy, that's actually what I do. I found that that works very well for me. I feed it every 4 to 6 days. The way I know that it needs to be fed is there'll basically be this like kind of like a little bit of the water will raise to the top, and there'll be a gray layer almost of water that's been in flour. And that just screams to me that the starter is very hungry and needs feeding. So what I do is I'll take it out of my refrigerator and I'll discard 80 or 90% of it. And I'll just kind of eyeball adding flour and adding water, and it'll basically come to the consistency of a loose dough. And that's it. And then I put the top back on. If you're gonna put it back in the refrigerator, I would wait a full day or two before you use it. If you're planning on using it right away, I would say you probably need a good 8 hours out to be able to use it, because it's got to get going. It's got to like be alive. It's got to grow again. So at minimum, I would feed it 8 hours before you're planning to use it, or overnight, like feed it in the evening and then use it the next day, or a few days ahead of time. If you're going to leave it in your refrigerator, I leave mine in my refrigerator. So basically my starter is ready to go whenever I feel like making bread. This is my sourdough bread recipe. It makes 2 loaves that are fairly good size. I think Janet said that this presentation will be available on YouTube afterwards. And again, I had my number and my email, and you guys are welcome to call me or text me or email me with any questions you have, and I'm happy to help. This particular recipe is pretty simple. In my opinion, sourdough is just flour, water, salt, and starter, which is just flour and water, and that's it. You can add different ingredients to it, different flavors, but that's the basis of sourdough, in my opinion. This is a really simple recipe. It's 1,000 grams of flour, which is 2.2 pounds, 750 ml of water plus 50 milliliters of water after the autolyse process. The autolyse process is the first process of mixing the 1,000 grams of flour and 750 milliliters of water together, and you let it sit for 30 minutes before you add the salt and the 50 ml of extra water. And basically what that does is it helps the flour hydrate, and it just kind of gets everything going. I have found that it's important for me to do that process first before I add the salt to the recipe. I did forget to mention at the very beginning, I do also add the starter. I don't wait for after 30 minutes to add the starter. I add the starter or what I'm going to add to it right away ahead of time, so I can kind of get working. So the only thing I add after the first 30 minutes is salt and a little bit more water. Again, combine the flour, starter, water in a mixing bowl and let it sit for 30 minutes. That's called the autolyse period. Add 50 milliliters of water and 28 grams of kosher salt after that period. And then every hour or so, you're going to want to fold the bread onto itself. This helps develop gluten, which is that like chewiness in the bread. That's the strength of the dough. And then once it's baked, it'll allow you to like spread butter on the bread and have that like have that really big crust on the outside and then be nice and chewy on the inside. Again, let it sit for an hour in between each fold. Complete the folding steps a total of 4 or 5 times. So that'll be about 4 or 5 hours. What I do is I do the 4 or 5 hours of folding, and then I put it in my refrigerator overnight. That's called a bulk fermentation, which is allowing the dough to ferment slowly over a long period of time. If you put it in the refrigerator, it's called a cold bulk fermentation. And in my opinion, it just helps develop flavor to kind of let it sit overnight. I remove it from the refrigerator. I divide the dough into 2 equal parts. There's really no need to weigh it out. You don't have to do that. Just eyeball it, 2 equal parts. And I place the dough in 2 well-floured baskets. If you don't have baskets, you could line a mixing bowl with parchment paper or something. You just want it to have that round shape or that oval shape. I take my Dutch oven and I preheat it in a 500-degree oven. In my experience, it's very important to cook bread like a lot hotter than what you would think, especially sourdough, because it needs to release its own steam, all that moisture that you put into the bread to create that pop. And that's what cooks the bread. It almost cooks from the inside out. As soon as I take out the hot Dutch oven, I put the bread that's in the basket, I turn it over right into the Dutch oven. I score it on top. It doesn't have to be pretty. You could just put 1 line through it. That'll help the steam release. And I place the cover over it and put it into the oven. I'll reduce the temperature to 450 for the first 30 minutes of the bacon. I don't touch it. I let it steam on the inside of that Dutch oven for 30 minutes. I'll remove the lid. You can at that point reduce the oven to 425, a little bit lower. You don't have to. It depends on how dark you like your crust. I like a dark crust, so I leave it at 450. If you want to reduce it to 425, it'll just be closer to a golden brown and not as dark, but that's just personal preference. So for the other 30 minutes, the lid's going to be off. they do say that bread should have an internal temperature of 200 degrees Fahrenheit if you have a thermometer, because then you know 100% like that bread is cooked. I've many times taken bread out too soon and letting it cool and cut into it, and it's kind of like half raw, and that's just a learning process, and it takes experience not to do that. You can't get discouraged if certain things happen. I would probably say, especially the first year that I was making bread, 20% of the bread that I made was not what I was looking for. And that's how it goes. That's how you learn, you know? So this is enriched bread, and this is part of the challah bread that we're gonna do today. In my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion, enriched means with the addition of fats, sugars, eggs, cream, and commercial yeasts. When I say commercial yeast, I mean dry active yeast or activated yeast, baker's yeast that comes in a big like block and it's more like a paste. But the regular stuff that you're gonna see at the store is like Fleshman's active yeast in a packet. I buy that in a 1 pound bag from Amazon. It's about $8. That lasts me a long time. One packet is 7 grams of yeast or 2.5 teaspoons. So it's just easier for me to have a big bag of it. I think for a long time I heard that yeast was like unavailable at Stop and Shop because so many people were baking at home. Like there was no flour, sugar, yeast. I find it much easier to buy like a little bit more for almost the same price online, and just you can have it at your house. Challah bread. Challah bread is an enriched yeast dough. Like I said before, I use a traditional brioche bread recipe for that, which I'm going to share with you, and I'm actually going to take you through making my brioche bread. Challah bread is braided, and it's baked open on a sheet. Let me just show you real quick the one that I made before. So I just cooked this, and it's nice and it's golden brown. And that's kind of what I'm going to show you today. This isn't a huge loaf, but it is challah. And this is made with the brioche bread recipe that I'm going to show you today. So my brioche bread recipe makes 2 loaves, and they're 2 1.5 pound loaves if you have a scale at home. It says dry ingredients weighed on the scale. That's very important because if you don't and you use like measuring cups, it's going to be a different amount. It is okay to use the measuring cup for the warm milk, 2/3 of a cup. So I use 2 1/3, and a tablespoon of honey. These ingredients will make the sponge. So I combine these ingredients and kind of leave them in a bowl for at least 30 minutes. That makes a sponge. It's almost like making a pre-ferment, like a starter for a dough that you're going to make with dry yeast. In my experience, that is very common. So they'll say like to bloom the yeast, and that just means to take whatever the liquid is in the dough and add the dry yeast to it. It rehydrates it, it gets it moving. You don't have to use warm water or warm milk to bloom yeast. Every recipe that you ever read says like use warm milk or warm water. You don't have to, it just takes longer for the process to happen if it's cold, but you don't have to worry about it dying. If it's too hot, you'll kill the yeast. So warm is good. If it's warm milk or it calls for warm liquid and you're doing milk and water, you can take cold milk out of your refrigerator and then use warm tap water, and you can mix those together. So it'll just kind of be warm with the cold and the hot mixed together. This is also a picture of the brioche bread recipe. This is just kind of rolls that were baked together next to each other. And they're kind of, they ended up being pull apart, which instead of braiding it in like a challah format, they were just baked together, like I said. So they become like pull apart brioche buns, good for hamburger buns. So once the sponge is started and sat for a half an hour, you can add the rest of these ingredients to it. except for the butter. So I use a KitchenAid, which is like a stand mixer, and with a dough hook, and I'll add these ingredients, and whenever I add ingredients to the stand mixer, I always add ingredients first on low until it gets mixed together. It's just a good habit to get into. And then you can up it to medium. I don't ever really go over medium unless I'm creaming sugar and butter together for cookies, or making like buttercream or whipped cream or something like that. If I'm making bread, I literally like use medium all the time. So these ingredients will be added to the stand mixer, and we'll mix it until it comes together. I would guess 3 to 4 minutes. We're gonna slowly add room temperature butter. So the thing about brioche bread is because there's so much butter in it, it's French, it has a lot of butter, fat is flavor. You have to make sure the butter gets emulsified into the dough, or it won't happen, it'll just split. So when they say like slowly add butter until basically you'll add like a couple like clumps and then let it fully incorporate. And when you don't see the butter anymore, then add more and more and more. You have to do that process, or it's just not gonna work. Once that is all mixed together, we're gonna cover the bowl and let it double in size. That can take anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. If it's really cold in your room, it can take 2 to 3 hours. In my experience, I have like tried to do it very fast. I'm like, oh, I don't have time. Like I'm gonna wait 45 minutes and then like go. And you can do that, but it's never gonna come out as good. It's not gonna be as fluffy. It's not gonna have like the flavor that it should have. Whenever I rush bread, it never comes out the way it should. You can't rush bread. I've tried so many times. We're gonna, once it's doubled in size, you punch it down, and then you can portion it in half or into 1.5 pound balls. At that point, you can put it in a bread pan if you want to just make regular loaves. You could portion them into small balls and put them next to each other, like the picture that I had of the pull-apart buns. We're gonna do this and we're gonna braid it into hollow loaves. Once it's punched down and shaped to wherever you want it, at that point you wanna let it rise another hour to 2 hours before you bake it. And that's what makes bread like aerated, and it'll give you that nice like texture and soft and chewy in the middle, but you'll get a nice crust on the outside. I brush with an egg wash, and then I bake it for about 45 minutes at 350. My oven has a convection setting on it, which is a small fan inside your oven. If you have that in baking breads, I suggest to use it. It's not a big deal if you don't. It might take a little bit longer if you don't, but I like the convection setting on my oven. It's just a personal preference. I feel like it makes it a more uniform cook. An egg wash to me is 1 egg beaten with a little bit of water. And some people add cream to their egg, and some people just use a straight egg. But whenever I do egg washes, I add a dash of water to 1 egg and beat it. And that's what I'm gonna do, is I'm gonna take a brush and I'm just gonna brush the top of whatever I want. And that'll give it that nice like golden brown color. If you do heavy cream, for instance, instead of an egg for your wash, you'll get that golden brown color, but it'll be dark. It'll be like a dark, it'll almost look burnt. To some it would be burnt, but it would just be a lot darker. I prefer an egg wash with just a little like touch of water, and that's it. Mix really well together, brush it on top. If you don't have a brush, that's fine. You can just use you can drizzle like a little bit on it and kind of use your hand. No big deal. I'll talk very quickly about a couple different styles of bread. This is a pizza dough recipe that I have. It makes 3.5 dough balls of 9-ounce doughs, and that's kind of your standard Neapolitan style pizza. I'm not going to go through all the ingredients, but these are 2 pizzas that came out. I actually had a pizza stone in my outdoor grill, my propane grill, and I got it as hot as I could, and I cooked them on that pizza stone in the grill. If you're going to use a pizza stone in your regular oven, get your oven as hot as you can. And I would say to preheat it, you want it to preheat it for 30 minutes just to make sure it's as hot as it can get. The hotter, the better for pizza. If you guys have seen the little pizza cookers that people have at their houses, they're like propane pizza cookers, like the Uni. Those get up to 750 degrees, sometimes even hotter. The hotter you can cook a flatbread, like a pizza or a naan, the better it's going to come out. Again, this is the process of making the pizza dough. I'm not going to go over it, but it will be in this presentation. Neapolitan style pizza, again, cooked on a preheated pizza stone or a baking stone, 500 degrees or as hot as you can get it. You can cook it in an oven, a grill, a pizza oven, a ceramic smoker, whatever is going to allow you to build that temperature. In my opinion, a Neapolitan style pizza is marinara, fresh basil, mozzarella, provolone cheese, and extra virgin olive oil. This is a non-dough recipe. I used to work at a place called D. Wolf's Tavern in Bristol, Rhode Island years ago when I was going to college at Johnson & Wales. And it was an Indian and classical French restaurant. My job was to operate the tandoori oven. It was a great experience. I was young. We made in-house non-dough, and it was some of the best stuff that I've ever had. It's literally slapped onto the side of the oven wall and cooked for about 1 minute, and then it comes off, and that's it. It's unbelievable. It's a flatbread recipe made with yogurt. TANGZHONG sour cream buns. I did these the other day. TANGZHONG is a method where some of the liquid in the recipe is cooked over the stove, like a roux, if you guys are familiar with a roux. But basically it's milk, water, and flour until it thickens on the stove, like over medium. If you're constantly stirring it, it basically like creates this thick paste. And what that does is it activates the starch and gets the starch like very thick. It'll end up keeping the bread moist for a long period of time. Like say you make pull-apart buns or rolls, and if you left them out or even like in a plastic bag, the next day they're kind of like hard or half hard. This method will let them last for like 3 or 4 days until that happens. Again, this is that recipe. I found this recipe in Bon Appetit in this month's Bon Appetit issue. Like their Thanksgiving issue. It was a scallion pull-apart bun or a scallion sour cream roll. I didn't have scallions at home. I had fresh thyme, so I used fresh thyme in mine. This is the dough. Once after it's doubled in size, pounded down, and then I rolled it out, and then I dusted it with the fresh thyme and a little paprika and salt and pepper. Rolled it back up again, and then divided it into balls. This is the dough when they're done. I'm sorry, the picture is not 100% clear, but you can see like the consistency of them. It's almost like a pillow. When I was really young, we went to Golden Corral. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's like an all-you-can-eat buffet kind of. My favorite thing about Golden Corral that I'll always remember is their dinner rolls and their whipped honey butter that go with the dinner rolls. Everything else was great, but that's my favorite thing about Golden Corral. I'll always remember that for the rest of my life. Classic sandwich bread. This is a King Arthur baking recipe. It's very simple. It's cooked in a bread pan, like a loaf pan, and you would never need to buy sandwich bread again at Stop and Shop. I was super happy with how this came out. It's terrific. So this is the end of that presentation, and I'm going to show you a demo now of the actual like making of the challah. So we'll go from there. This is the sourdough loaf that's kind of a little bit dark on the top. People would say like, oh, that's kind of burnt on the top. I actually like that darkness. That's like keeping the oven at 450 and not dropping it to 425. Some people would say that that's too dark. In my opinion, it's not. I'm just setting up my computer so you guys can see me. I have my ingredients out. So this is my stand mixer. You guys are fairly familiar with that. In this, I have the sponge. So I have dry yeast, flour, milk, and honey. And I've basically, like right before we started the presentation, I put that in here. So it's kind of been hanging out for a good 35, 40 minutes. I'm doing a 1 loaf recipe of the brioche recipe that I just presented to you. So this is 2.5 eggs. This is actually 3 eggs, but I used some of it as an egg wash on the challah bread that I just made. So this is what's left over from that. This is the flour, sugar, salt. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start it on low and let it come together. I have 1 stick of butter here, which is 4 ounces, and it's just chopped up, so it's basically at room temperature. The reason why I chop it up is because it needs to be added slowly, and it needs to emulsify into the dough. As you can see, I started it very low, and that's just, you know, from experience. It's a good habit to get into so stuff doesn't go all over the place. There's a lot of professional bakers that they'll say, I always, whenever I'm adding ingredients, until it's almost fully incorporated, I mix on low. And they're using mixers that mix 100 pounds of dough at a time. That's just what they do. I'm looking for my bread scraper and I can't find it. My baby steals everything. So sorry about that. I think she put it down the hallway. So.
Hey, Sean, we have a question in the chat, and it
Sure.
says, do you think specialty flours, rye, etc., are best for sourdough or just regular?
You know, I don't have a ton of experience using different flours in sourdough. I know you can. I think they would be just as good. I think it can take some trial and error. I think that any new flour, like if I use a new flour, even with all my experience, it's probably not going to come out exactly how I want it to come out the first time or the second time. It's probably going to take a few times. And it's just like getting used to that particular flour, whether it's rye or whole wheat. There's a lot of different flours. I've been very successful at using, like I said, name brand King Arthur baking, all purpose in almost all the baking that I do. You guys saw, like, say, for instance, the pictures of the pizza. A lot of people say, no matter what, you have to use bread flour for pizza, and I don't. I just use what I have because that's what we have available. And in my opinion, it came out really, really great. So it's just personal preference. I'm gonna take this down real quick, and I'm gonna try to show you guys on a screen. And I can pick this up because it is sticky. But basically, it's pretty pliable. And I would say it's almost like Play-Doh. It's fairly smooth at this point, but there's been no butter added. So I would say at this point, you could probably just keep it like this to make a regular enriched dough. And you don't have to add the butter. What makes it a brioche, like a classic French brioche, is the butter emulsifying into it. So that's what I'm gonna do now. So one piece at a Yep, you can.
I was just gonna say, if
questions.
people have questions, you're welcome to put it in the chat and I'll kind of throw it out to
Yeah,
Sean.
please. You know, I'm adding this butter. It's probably one notch up from the lowest it can go. And like I said, this is probably put into 6 or 7 pieces. And I'm gonna wait until that each piece is fully incorporated to add the next one. It's emulsifying the fat into the dough. It's enriching the dough, and the dough is like soaking that up.
Sean, could you, it's not melted butter, it's room temperature. Is that, you can't use melted butter?
I wouldn't use melted butter in this because you want it to have like, you want it to, it almost like rubs into the dough, like in the mixer. And I think that that's important. You can use melted butter in a lot of different things, and some recipes call for it. A lot of baking calls for melted butter that use like the chemical leaveners, baking soda, baking powder. A lot of baking with yeast breads use like room temperature butter. This is probably a little bit cooler than room temperature, which is fine, but it's not melted. I've actually never tried to make brioche with melted. You could try and let me know how it comes out. It might come out fantastic. This is how I was trained to do it years and years and years ago. So this is just kind of how I kept it. Where I worked, this recipe comes from a place in Portland, Maine, and I worked in Portland, Maine for a number of years. And we used to make like 6 to 8 loaves of brioche a day, every day. And that would be used for French toast and duck confit toast and that kind of stuff.
What's your favorite kind of bread that you make now that you make so many different kinds?
You know, I would say that sourdough is definitely like my favorite, just because I've kind of specialized in that over the years. But I like to switch it up too. I was on a baguette run for like a long time, and I probably made 50 or 100 loaves of baguettes at my house. And I tried some of them just like with my sourdough starter, so they would be 100% like sourdough baguettes. And then I also tried some with dry activated yeast and starter. I personally wouldn't consider them sourdough baguettes unless it was 100% sourdough with no added yeast, but that's also open to interpretation. In my opinion, sourdough is just all natural yeast, no yeast added, like no dry yeast added. At any time, and this is like the dough scraper that I have. This is the mat for nylon dough scraper that I was talking to you about. It's very like pliable and very thin, and you can easily like scrape stuff or scoop like herbs up or something with it. At any time, if your dough is sticking to the sides or stuff is sticking to the sides, it's always a good idea kind of just like scrape it down, you know? You can never scrape the side of your bowl down too much.
The holidays are coming up and Thanksgiving and Christmas. Is there anything you're working on special for your table?
You know, a few days ago I tried those sour cream buns, and I think that I am gonna include the sour cream buns for Thanksgiving. I've also, I know this is kind of off topic, but I've also been really into pies lately. And there's this really great book coming out in a week from Erin McDowell. She's pretty popular on Food 52, but she's a really great pastry chef, like a baker pastry chef. and her book that's coming out is called The Book on Pie. But I've been following her for like a number of years, and I'm really excited for that book to come out. But I've also really been making a lot of pies, so that maybe in the future is something else that we could have conversations about too.
Yeah, totally. I'm actually I found the link to that book. I'm gonna put it in the chat if anyone else wants to check it out. It looks good.
I think it comes out the 9th, but I'm not 100% sure. Maybe the 10th. I thought it was about a week. So this is kind of the last stage of the butter added to the dough. That is quite a lot of butter for this dough. And like I said, my full recipe on the presentation was for 2 loaves. And this is for 1 loaf of bread, and it's a full stick of butter in it. So it is a lot. It's a lot for the dough to take in. And in the mixer itself, it's like, you know, slowly absorbing the butter, and at points it'll be like, oh, like, is this not going to come together, because it's just like it's just so much butter, but it always comes together in the end, and you just kind of let it go. And if it's not really mixing around as much, again, which I'm going to do right now, is I'm going to stop it, and I'm going to scrape down all the sides. And make sure you kind of scrape it up from the bottom. If anyone has any questions while I'm doing this, feel free to ask. Come on, come on. So we're just about there, and I'll show you guys the consistency of it. You'll kind of know that it's fully incorporated when nothing else is sticking to the sides of the mixing bowl, and literally the mixing bowl is like almost 100% clean, and it looks like it'll look almost like it wasn't even used.
Sean, we have a request to see the loaf that you took out of the oven earlier.
Yeah, sure. So this is the loaf that I took out of the oven. This is a little quarter sheet pan. This is a half sheet pan. So this is pretty common in restaurants. Restaurants also use full sheet pans, but like at home, I'll use a half sheet pan and a quarter sheet pan. It's just like more user friendly. And I basically have like a little sill pad that fits into the sheet pan. And instead of like spraying it or lining it with parchment paper, these pads are great. They're reusable. Again, they're called sill pat, and they're just, you know, they fit into the pan perfectly. Again, that's like a quarter sheet. And this is great for like a single loaf, or like a single meat loaf, or, you know, but this is the braided challah that I made at the beginning of the presentation, and that was in the oven for about 35 minutes. Like I said, my oven has convection setting, so that was under convection for 35 minutes at 350. It's nice and glossy, and it has that like golden brown color. That gloss is from the egg wash. If you don't put an egg wash on it, it's fine, but it's not going to get like that like nice glossy the color. So you can kind of see that it's chewy in the middle and pulls apart. It almost reminds me of like a big pretzel, but it's not that dense. It's a lot more light.
And And how long would you cook it without convection? The same amount of time?
I would guess maybe add 5 or 10 minutes. If you do have a thermometer at home, a great way to check to make sure it's 100% done is internal temperature of 200 for most breads. And you let it rest for like at least 30 minutes after it comes out. If you cut bread when it's really, really hot right out of the oven, no matter what, like the texture on the inside it'll be almost like a sponge, and it won't be like light and fluffy. It'll kind of like, it needs time to rest. So I'm going to show you guys this real quick. And then I have another one that I'm going to be able to kind of mold into a hollow real quick to show you. But this is the brioche recipe. This is 1.5 pounds. So this is enough for 1 loaf. And so whatever I want to do with this, I can, like I said, I can make buns, or I could roll this out and stuff it with ham and cheese and roll it up and cook it like that. Bread is very forgiving. There's like different styles of bread, but it's open to interpretation of what you want to do with that style of bread. It doesn't have to be set in stone. Bread is, like I said, it's all inclusive, but it's on an individual basis, whatever you have around. At this point, I would cover this and I'll let this rise for 2 hours, so it's doubled in size, before I shape it. Brioche is very forgiving because of the amount of fat that's in it. I could probably shape it right now, but anytime you're using dry active yeast, you always let it double first, punch it down, and then it's going to rise a second time right before you cook it. And that'll give you that like great texture that you have and nice and airy. So this is a brioche that I made before. I made this earlier. I actually made this last night, and I let it rise in my refrigerator overnight. So that's quite a long time, almost 24 hours. So it's a really slow, like cold bulk fermentation that develops flavor and that develops texture. And right now it's a little bit cold still, but I think that that's going to work to my advantage. I mean, this is basically enough for like 2 loaves. So what I'll do, this is kind of me like punching it down, if you will, because you want to get like the air out of it, right? So I'll cut this in half with my scraper. So now these are going to be like 2 loaves. And I'm just going to do a quick braid of like 3, like 3 braids for each loaf. Some people do 4, some people do 5, some people do 6. I like to keep it simple, and I do 3. So what I do is I'll roll out this dough. Brioche has a lot of fat in it, so nothing like, it's not really like sticky, and it'll kind of like go to wherever you need it to go. If your bread ever sticks, just dust it with a little bit of flour and it should be fine. There's nothing wrong with dusting bread with a little bit of flour. Try not to put a lot of flour because it can like change the texture and the consistency of it, but it's not that huge of a deal. I would rather have bread not stick to something and add flour than have it all sticky, like a big sticky mess, and add no flour at all. All right, so let's see. I'm going to tilt this down real quick just so you guys can see it. And I'm going to try to braid it towards you. So I have basically like 3 long, thin rolls of the brioche bread, and I'm just kind of like squeezing them together at this end. So I'm just going to basically go from the left or go from the right, whatever you want to start with. I do a really simple braid, and I just bring it over the middle. So now the one that was on the left is in the middle. I'm going to bring the one that's on the right in the middle. And then I kind of even them out, and I Continue to do the same thing as even as possible. You know, my hand's probably in the way. If you have a little bit extra, you tuck it under, you know? So this is our braided challah. I have a half sheet pan with parchment paper that I'm just gonna set it on. I'm gonna do this one more time. So I'm gonna have 2 braided challahs. It's not really like super critical if the braids are the exact same size, but you kind of want it as uniform as possible. All right, so I have my 3 and I'm pinching this and kind of rolling it under. So I'm gonna bring this left hand braid over. And then that becomes a middle. And I'm gonna bring this right hand braid over. And I'm gonna keep on going back and forth. This also is giving me good experience to learn how to braid my daughter's hair when she's older. I'm just gonna make it all uniform. These aren't huge. And I'm gonna put this on the half sheet pan as well. So right now, these are the 2 braided challah breads that we made. At this point, I'll take like a kitchen towel and I'll lightly place it over the top. And for a good hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, I'm gonna let that double in size. The general rule of thumb, say you had like, it was in a bread pan and you place it in a bread pan, which you're more than welcome to like cook a challah or a braided bread in a loaf pan also. But the general rule of thumb in a loaf pan is to let the bread rise so it's at least 1 inch above the top. I like to have it rise till it's about 2 inches above the top. Have your oven preheated, brush it with egg wash, and put it in. Myself personally, I'm not gonna cook these 2 today. I'm gonna put these in the refrigerator and they're gonna rise slowly over the course of overnight. And it's something that I'm gonna cook tomorrow. The flavor will be better. It'll give it basically like, bread likes time, you know, bread doesn't like fast. Bread likes to relax. And it's almost like anything. If you make like a really great soup, it's always better the next day, in my opinion, because the flavors have time to kind of get together. That's no different with bread. So that's kind of the end of my demonstration. And I just kind of want to open it up for questions. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Sure. Yeah. There were a few in the chat, but if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, you're welcome to. Actually, I have a question. Is when you make the challah bread, how long can you keep it? Like how long does it stay fresh?
You know, bread in general is good once it cools all the way down, to put it in like a Ziploc bag. Or sourdough, for instance, it's not going to be super great after 2 or 3 days. A lot of people make like breadcrumbs out of it or croutons or something like that. There's not anything in it to kind of like preserve it. You know what I mean? Because it's literally just water, flour, salt, and that's it. Challah is probably similar. The longer you keep it airtight, it's going to be nicer. But these are different than breads from the store shelf. These are homemade breads, and these are going to last, you know, 3 days-ish. That's probably like a good ballpark number. The the bread from the shelves at the store, some of them are good, like, you know what I mean? Don't get me wrong, but if I have the opportunity to make bread, even a sandwich loaf by myself at home, I'm just, besides the fact like of it's something that you can say like I made my own, I think it's like a much more healthier way than the stuff in the store. I'm sure there's some type of preservatives in the stuff in the store.
Well, you've inspired me. I'm aiming to make a challah bread for my Thanksgiving.
Anastasia just said, which I will, another good idea is when you make bread, we make bread at home and we pre-sliced it and then we put it in a Ziploc bag and we put it in the freezer. So it almost turns into like an Eggo, not like that consistency, but Eggos are basically pre-cooked slices. You can take this right out of the freezer and put it directly into the toaster, and it's like fresh bread, you know? So if I'm gonna freeze it, that's what I would do, is I would like pre-slice it and kind of do it that way.
Someone has a question about filtered water. Is it important to use filtered water, I think is the question.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with where you live. And I know for a fact that in the water treatment process on Nantucket, we actually disinfect with UV, not chlorine. But a lot of communities do use chlorine. If you find that your starter or your breads, like not specifically if you're doing like a sourdough, it would be your starter not being active. That's probably has something to do with like, you know, what's in your water. I think the water on Nantucket's great, and I've never had any problems with it at all. I don't see the benefit of using it, but you're more than welcome to. I don't think it'll hurt it, but I just use regular water out of the tap here.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Lydia.
Hi, thanks for this class. It's great.
Thank you.
You would put it in the freezer. Would you let it rise first, then put in the freezer, or do you put in the freezer, take it out, thaw it out, and then let it rise?
Yeah, sorry. That was actually already cooked. And so that was like cooked in slices, ready to basically eat. But the bread that I just made, I'm gonna leave in the refrigerator overnight. And then that's basically gonna like allow it to rise very slowly for 24-hour period or 18 hours. And then I can kind of take it right from the refrigerator and put it right in the oven and cook it. I've never really tried to freeze raw dough and then cook it right away, but it could work. I'm not sure. But I do often leave dough in the refrigerator, like for either the bulk fermentation or the final rise before I cook it. Even sourdough, like I'll leave in the baskets before I cook it in my Dutch ovens, and I'll pull it directly from the refrigerator and cook it put it right into a 500-degree Dutch oven and cook it, and it comes out just as great. It's almost easier to score the top of it when it's cold and not like warm, you know?
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? I'm gonna get in touch with Sean. I did put his contact information in the chat if you want to scroll up and see that, and I'll include it when I can email everyone that came tonight. And then I'll ask Sean, I'm sure he wouldn't mind. Would you mind sharing your recipes from your presentation so people can have it?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
We can figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I'll get in touch with you.
Yeah, that's fine. It is in the presentation. But I also, because I have recipes that I have like, you know, written out. So I'm happy to share those as well.
All right, great. All right, any final questions?
I just want to say thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks a lot.
This was spectacular, Sean. Thanks so much. I know you have someplace to be. So thanks so much for your time. And once again, this will be posted on the Athenaeum YouTube page, and I'll send out the link once I have it to everyone that was here tonight. So thanks, Sean, and thank you, everyone. We have Yummy Mondays coming up the next, definitely. And our next one is the Spice Challenge. We're gonna, if you sign up by Thursday, you'll get a packet of fenugreek. which is a Mediterranean spice. You can experiment with it over the weekend and then come on Monday and let us know what you cooked. We also have Bianca Bosker. She wrote the book Cork Dork, and she's gonna, if you bring a glass of wine, she's gonna show us how to enjoy wine with all our senses. And we have a few other things coming up, so stay tuned. And with that, I'll wish everyone a very good evening. Thanks so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you,
Thank
Sean.
you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.